just realizing like, oh, we're doing this thing together, and we're in this together, and like we're excited to figure it out together.
That was really refreshing to be in a situation where I didn't feel like I had to pretend like I had all the answers.
There was a sense of like childlike play. Did we all just become best friends?
Hi, friends. Welcome to another Dreams of Education podcast. I am Kelly Tankley, and I'm joined with my co-host.
I am Michelle Baldwin.
And you have counted yourself in for some more sweet, sweet stories from Anastasis Academy circa 2011. And I don't know about you. I was looking through photos from 2011. And in my mind, we had a lot more together than we had together in reality. Like, we really could not have been more lean. And I know that we started from zero, but looking back at the photos from that time, we legitimately started from zero. We were in these creative spaces, and I'll share kind of the spaces because they were kind of unique spaces to learn out of in a church of all places. But we had these two large rooms that were not your traditional classroom look, feel, anything. And three of you were teaching in one space, separated by no walls, which we'll talk about those challenges. And then two were in the other room, which was slightly smaller, and which defaulted to the oldest kids often just working out in the hallway, which is where my office was a table in the hallway. And so we started from humble beginnings, but looking back at the pictures, they were more humble than I even remember until I go and look. Do you remember your first impressions of the space, or how you felt about three of you being in one room?
I think because we didn't really know what to expect, and that we knew that we didn't want it to look like a traditional classroom. The initial, the space was cool and the design was interesting.
It
and
was
the kids
cool.
Really liked the design. Wasn't there a VW Beetle and bug?
It wasn't a bug. It was a Jeep, sawed in half, stuck to the wall.
And kids loved that. That was in the
yellow
other room.
Jeep.
Yeah,
they loved to read there. Yeah, anytime that we had kids, they loved to read there. And then there was that backstage area, like a puppet studio.
Yeah, kind of.
And then there was a literal stage that looked like a news studio.
Right.
It was very Google Plexi kind of, it had that feel of, I don't know, just a fun, playful space.
And definitely was playful and that's what really attracted the kids to a lot of, they would walk in and their eyes would get really big the first time they saw it. And it was immediately, I want to go touch that. And I remember there were clocks on the wall from different cities all around the world, and they really loved that. Yep. And again, this was still we think 2011, and we don't really think about how different the internet was at that time, but it was a much different space and place and time compared to now. So there were a lot of things that we take for granted that, it's super easy to look up now. That wasn't the case back then.
Right.
For that space to be that inviting and just a different design, I think the kids really helped change their mindset a little bit of, this is not going to look like traditional school.
It definitely was the first indicator of what to be school is not what we're doing here, for sure. Right. Because there was no way to do it the way they were used to, which in some ways was really nice. It forced us all to think in really different ways, teachers and myself included. And in some ways, there were so many challenges that first year, but we'll talk about those, as we get in, because there are a lot of challenges. But I was thinking back to when we first all met, just staff, and I don't think we had a fully fleshed out professional development, really. It was kind of this co-created thing with a few moments of structure that we knew we wanted to do. And I remember the thing that I brought to the table that year was the activity where we were kind of rethinking about our own identity and how we saw each other as peers. And we kind of kept pieces of that activity that we've done different years all the way through on, and it's kind of been refined over time to now we like create our own. We're not just teachers at Anastasis or principal or whatever. We have our own name. We have our own identity on
Different job titles. Yeah.
Job titles. Yes. Thank you for helping that brain, that momentary brain offline. I don't know what happened. But yeah, just thinking about, coming together as, you, the only ones who knew each other, and then Matthew and I knew each other, but the rest of us were all new to each other. And so, starting from a place of just being rooted in identity, I think, as teachers as well, because that's what we determined we were going to do for students is let's start with the students and then work out from there. I also was remembering that I built all the learner profiles that year. And so our learner profiles, we were looking for what kind of multiple intelligence strengths do the kids have, their learning style preferences, the preferences they had around how they thought about themselves as learners, and then how they thought about space with the kind of brain dominance preferences. Did they prefer quiet or loud, or, movement, was that distracting or not, those kind of things. But I did every single one for all 54 students. So before the school year started, I would go from house to house, sit with the kids in their kitchen. And that was kind of lovely, like to see everybody's space and their excitement to show me like their rooms and things like that was kind of nice. But I remember the entire thing, that process for the first year, I had a list of questions I asked all the kids, and I think I've shrunk down that list over years because it was just so overwhelming. But all these questions, and then also to determine those other pieces about them, and it was completely just verbal talking discussion. And I remember that the oldest kids could get it done like pretty quickly. It was not so painful to get through. It took about an hour. For the youngest, who at the time was 4.5, I remember sitting in her kitchen and we're like 5 questions in, and she's like, "Are we almost done?" I'm going, "Oh no, sweet baby, we're not almost done." And so we would keep going through, and she'd say, "How many more do you have? Can I see the sheet? How many is there still?" And it was such a painful process. And then the one student that you had, sweet boy, but so indecisive. And it literally took, I got his siblings done pretty quickly, but it took him, I am not kidding, like 4.5 hours to get through. And by the end, we're all like ready to just be in tears. But I got to know the kids really well in that process. And then I brought all of you here's all the data. And we learned, I think, pretty quickly that was not the way to do it.
No, it's hard just to read it on paper and not having had the conversation, because what we've learned over time was sitting and talking with those kids, asking them questions, or playing the card game that you developed later, that's where the stories came through. And it wasn't about their answers as much as it was them talking about, here's why I like to read in the dark compared to reading in a bright room. And then they would share an anecdote, and you'd be like, "Oh, okay." And that was a lot of insight to who that child was and might be in the classroom.
Yeah, I loved the process. I got to know them all so well before we started the school. But I remember in those moments thinking like, oh, the teachers should actually be the ones doing this, not me. Because all of this was it's hard to take all those like incidental stories that come along and to share all that information, or like they all had little cute quirks that you picked up in those moments. That you guys had to learn longer that first year. It took longer to learn just because I was the one doing that process instead of letting all of you do that process.
Well, even just listening to them think through a question and how that, like, you can, for some kids, you can see the thought process is happening on their faces, and others, they'll just kind of like go into this staring across the room back and like, okay, that is that kid's thinking face. All those little things, that you just pick up on in the idiosyncrasies that kind of come alive, and you're like, oh, that's part of this kid's personality. Or there might be a way that you ask a question that it takes them a longer time to really process through it, and how important that is then to know later on down the road.
Yep. Okay, so we went back through some of our documents and things just to look at, like, jog the memory, some of our emails. And the first week, Michelle, we literally have a Google Doc of like bullet points next to times of things that we were going to do. And I think we made that at the Rio over lunch and margaritas and like, okay, what does our first week look like? What is our plan going to be? And it was seriously like we co-created this like hobbled together. You all had such trust that this was going to work. I think back to like being a teacher and not knowing like, what does my day one look like? What curriculum because we didn't use curriculum. There was
nothing.
We didn't own any curriculum. There was literally nothing. And so it was, these kids are going to show up and what are we going to do week one? And we like sat around and typed up this, so sweet.
But, I think there are a couple of things there. First of all, you and Matthew, pretty intentional, I think, about getting us all together, all of the staff, and really call it bonding. We didn't call it any of those things, but it was really important that we could gel as a group, and that happened. The people that you hired also were not afraid to improvise when needed to think quickly on their feet, have enough experience and confidence in themselves as teachers to kind of go, okay, yeah, we don't have textbook that we're going to go from, so what resources can we pull from? We could go to you. Or we're like, oh, I think I really need to take the kids to the library for this. So a lot of the thinking that very first year was, looks different on purpose. And even though I know personally, I fell back on some old habits that I didn't like. I look back now and go, oh, wish I would not have done that. But I feel like.
Can you think of, like, give us an example of something you to you was falling back on a old practice?
So this is a very student-centered environment, and inquiry is where kids are really doing a lot of discovery rather than a teacher giving them all of this information and them memorizing it and either regurgitating it, as we like to say in education, or applying it to something new. And we didn't have a textbook, for example, to say, okay, today we're going to work on multiplication and here's what you're going to do. So there were some times when the kids would be working on something and asking questions, and I would just give them the answers. And then I'd step back and go, wait a second, that's not what I'm here for. So I learned how to ask questions back. But I know when I was feeling tired or stressed or whatever, because, again, we're all human, there were times when I would slide back into that teacher as the knowledge keeper and distributor versus someone who can help them discover it. And again, like, we're not a free for all. We weren't just going and looking things up, and again, because the internet was different back then.
No, not at all. It and I may be painting the picture a little bit too loosely. We were still structured by, at that time, Common Core standards.
Right.
I had rewritten them in like student friendly language, so we were working with the kids of how do you make a goal and how do you aim towards that goal. I think we had a very rosy or optimistic view that they would be excited to like create their own learning goals based on Common Core standards, which, some of them got into that and some of them it was like, I don't know. They've never done it before.
Right.
It's like, I don't know what I want to learn next. I don't even know what this means. And so that I think we took over or partnered in a different way as we went.
Right.
Because it started out where we were giving kids all the, like, here's all the freedom to choose where you're going to go and you're learning next. And they're like, they had no idea. I think it was just overwhelming.
Oh, for sure.
For kids coming out of a very traditional. But I like you, I noticed that it was hard for me to have the wait time or to respond in questions or to encourage the questions rather than just stepping in and helping. I think that was hard for me too.
Well, and I think for the kids, as you said, they weren't used to any freedom, first of all, in learning.
No.
They a lot of times didn't even associate what we were doing with actual learning. Because I do remember a lot of them going home and say, well, we haven't started learning yet. We're still playing games. Or we're still just having fun in school. And their parents would come back to us and say, okay, when does the real learning start? mean,
It's been happening all along. Yeah.
We've been doing this for 2 months, and they didn't recognize that they were learning because it looked like fun to them instead of worksheets or tests or whatever.
I was going to say they were so used to worksheets and filling, guess what the teacher is thinking, being learning, that they didn't recognize at all that what we were doing was learning, because we were paperless from the beginning.
Yeah.
And part of that was the iPads. It was first generation iPads. They didn't do what they do now. So there was a lot that we just had to figure out or do differently. And I say we're paperless, but we did a lot of project-based, even that first year. There was a ton of hands-on and constructing and building and designing, but they weren't doing worksheets.
Right. We built cities. They got really creative with a lot of different materials and what can I make this look like this. We used toothpicks and math. I mean, just lots of different things that they were doing. With the iPads, doing a lot of blogging in my class for sure. I do remember you'd said something earlier that they were trying to guess what the teacher wanted them to think. And that brings back this huge memory of, I gave the kids a prompt and I wanted to know what they thought, and, kind of higher level thinking of, evaluate this idea and what do you think? And I think I got some tears. That was the hardest thing I'd asked them to do, apparently. And I just sat there and I was like, well, and I remember one little girl came up and she said, what do you want me to write? I'm not sure. And I said, well, I want you to tell me your opinion about XYZ. And she goes, I know, but I don't know what the right answer is. And I was like,
struggled with that so much. The first 3 years for sure. Like there was a good stretch of time that was the biggest struggle, was just getting them to think independently of what's the teacher brain. And because we've so conditioned kids that learning is, there's a right answer and it's in the teacher's head.
Exactly. And what I would say to them, I don't care about a right answer here. I'm really looking to hear what you think, how you're feeling. I mean, again, we're in the last episode a little bit about metacognition and reflection and all of that. Yeah. But that had never been, I'm not going to say it, completely generally here speaking, and like that teacher never asked them that, but a regular occurrence in their learning. They were not used to anybody really wanting to know what they thought about it. And I was like, I kept saying, well, that's where the learning is, guys. This is when you're thinking about it and telling me your opinion, and your opinion might change later on when you know more. But right now, I just want to know what you think and feel. And then they're like, oh, and they still didn't quite trust that. It took them quite a while to get to the point.
It took a while.
Oh, yeah. And they would come up all the time. Is this okay? Is this okay? And I said, are you okay with it?
The check-ins. Yes.
So there was a lot of coming up and asking questions on like, is this the right answer? Or is this okay? Or do you like what I did? And I'm like, do you like what you did?
It was the transfer of the cognitive load from the teacher to the student, and they had never experienced actual learning.
Right.
They had experienced a lot of, let me tell you back what you told me was important.
Right.
But when that shift of cognitive load went to the kids, they had no idea what to do with it. And there were a lot of tears. I remember in the junior high, there were a lot of tears because it was just so foreign to them that they would have to think, and that they might hit on a wrong answer. Or they might hit on, not fully understanding their thinking yet, or not knowing how to explain their thinking, because again, that's not what had been asked of them earlier.
Right. And again, I'm sure somewhere in their lives, and the kids that I had at that time were 9, 10, 11. And I'm sure somewhere up to that point, somebody had asked them an opinion, but they really did not feel like they had the freedom and the independence to have independent thought.
Well, and you probably, if I'm remembering correctly, you probably gave them choices of how they were going to share that.
Right.
Because we gave a lot of choice of like, you could do stop motion, you could write, you could make a poem, you could write a song. We gave them like all the freedom of it can look how, but it was like, but what do you want it to look like?
Right.
they were so used to, even if they're sharing an opinion, it looks like a 5-paragraph essay, that they didn't know how to do it.
I think sometimes there was too much freedom of choice that it was overwhelming for certain kids. And then when that like it dawned upon me, like, oh, they're struggling with, I can't even decide what I want to do. Then I would have to, like, as we started to learn more about the kids, a few constraints here and there, so that they didn't always feel. Some kids loved all of the menus that they had options with, and others were like, I can't do this.
And I think we always, from the beginning, once we hit on, they need some boundaries or constraints because it's too much freedom. They just don't know what to do. They haven't had that opportunity. They don't know what to do with all that freedom. I think what happened is we'd have those outlier kids who were like, give me all the freedom, who would then say, well, instead of that, could I do this instead? I was like, great, but that took a while for the community at large to develop. And I was remembering, I went back to a blog post because I swore that we had started Detox Week the first year, and we didn't do that the first year, even though we knew of detox. So Monica Hardy, who was here in Colorado, had this innovation lab where she would bring kids in, and she talked about that they need a detox because they're so used to learning looking a certain way that when you give them the freedom, like, they need a way to get rid of the labels of what learning looks like. And I really think that our entire first year was detox for all of us of what does learning look like? How does it have to look? How do we talk about it? The whole first year ended up being that. And I don't think it was until year 2 that we actually codified it as, well, let's spend a full week helping them let go of some of what they think they know about themselves as learners or about what learning looks like and things like that. But in my memory, we had done that since year 1, but maybe it's because, like, we were all doing it together and it was the full year.
And detox, as we moved on, it looked more like, okay, let's get all of the kids, the entire school together and do some team building, or let's work on challenges. A lot of them were, like, take some paper clips and some rubber bands and build a structure that, we had some constraints or some, you absolutely have to do this, but you can also make some other choices. And we were careful not to give them too many of how to do it. We did see that first year, again, a lot of frustration. I remember we built a stylus that you'd given them some instructions.
Yes. iPad stylus before there was an Apple Pencil.
Even, I think you could buy a stylus that had the little foam,
could too.
But they weren't very common.
And they were expensive. They were like $25, something like that. Yeah, we emptied out Bic pens and we made our own stylus because I realized that Scotch-Brite sponge is conductive. And so if we could complete the circuit, and so we built these pens together, and I thought, oh, kids are going to love this. We'll do it. We did do that whole school, didn't we? And you had tears over that one, as I recall.
There were, not me personally, but a lot of kids.
Those might have been mine. Yeah.
They're really frustrated because they couldn't all get theirs to work. And again, when you're coming from a traditional environment, when failure gets punished with a grade, and again, they're like, watch the different personalities of kids, and the ones who are like, oh, that didn't work, I'll try again. And the ones who the first time don't get it, and they're already either really angry and frustrated or really teary and angry and frustrated.
Or immediately, the number of them that immediately went to a teacher to fix this.
Yep. I can't get
do
it to
this
work.
for me.
Do it for me. Did you try this? So learning how to respond to those kids, so giving them permission. Well, yeah, you didn't get it right this time, but let's try it a different way. Are you doing an exact same thing over and over and over again, and it's not working? What should we learn from that?
Remembering the number of them where you're like, who could you ask? Somebody, I noticed that so-and-so figured out that part. Could you maybe ask them for help? And the number of them that thought that was copying or cheating.
Right.
Collaboration is copying and cheating. Like, there was so much to undo. that first year.
Even the kids who did figure it out, and some of them would put their arms around their work.
Hide it.
And hide it. I'm like, not graded on this.
Right. I mean, and the kids knew we threw out grades. They knew that there wasn't, even taking away that fear of getting the wrong grade, they still didn't trust that we were going to stick with that.
Right. Well, you and I had talked about this before, but I had written a blog post before Anastasis started, and it was about competition, how much education is steeped in competition or vice versa. And looking at it and going, okay, how does that really help students become better learners? Because if you're always succeeding with little effort, learning, if you're never succeeding with a ton of effort, you're basically getting failing grades all the time. Why would you keep trying? And I kept looking at, why are we asking kids to compete against each other, getting ranked and sorted in high school for, class rank, all of those kind of things. And I looked back at that. It's even embedded in what we do in elementary school. In so-and-so is making her cues better than everybody else. And I'm like, is that really what we want to do? Is that really capturing how kids learn? And if we always have them competing, what does that do to each of them as an individual, and how is that facilitating learning? Because we knew it wasn't. And so that was another thing that, even talking with parents, we really had that struggle to say, it's getting done or learning something faster than someone else doesn't make your child smarter or better. And that is ingrained in us as a society. It makes me so sad because it's not true.
And it's incredible how often you hear schools talk about a growth mindset, or you hear schools, and even then we heard a lot about that, even in 2011, or you heard schools talking about and a lot of this was, I think, like Google, Apple, Pixar driven, that language of fail better, fail fast, fail forward. Like, we heard a lot about failure being okay. And so that message would trickle into schools, but then our actual practices were still so fixed in the mindset that kids couldn't trust it. And I think our kids at Anastasis kept waiting for like the other shoe to drop of, when is this actually going to, you say it's okay for me to fail or for me to ask a friend, but at what point are you going to, is that a liability for me now?
Right.
Because you're going to flip a switch and do the other thing. Because that is what had been done to them.
There's a lot of baggage that comes along with that. I know we talked about this before in the last episode, but you start to feel like you're the dumb kid. And also, like, even just asking questions when you have a class that goes out to a whole class, it's, the ones who have their hands up first are often the ones who get called on. We said, don't raise your hands.
Yeah.
Right. We didn't want kids to raise hand for that reason. And
I think we banned it that first year. I think we were like, don't. Yeah.
And it was, I remember going on trips, like learning trips with kids, and they didn't raise their hands and speak out. And the people who were like leading our field trip somewhere,
docents or whoever,
going, oh, this is weird. They didn't know how to deal with that. So it was interesting. Yeah. But I do think that when we watched the kids kind of start to really, they always knew who was going to answer first. And so ask them sometimes, hold yourself, think about it for a little bit. If you feel like you know an answer, then share it with the class. But let's not always just look at, I'm speediest. And it made me change the way that I asked questions also. They had to be more open-ended. It couldn't just be, what's 5 times 6? Like, how many different ways can we look at 5 times 6 and create different groupings? Or where do we see this and how does it come out differently the way that you look at it? And then would start to participate and really discuss what they were seeing. My favorite part was watching them say, oh, well, I see it this way. And then they would go draw it on a board somewhere. And I never thought about it that way. We started to see.
Well, suddenly the kids who never had voice in a regular classroom setting could be heroes, because it was like, oh, that's how the teacher was going to show us how to do it. But like, you figured out how to get there in these 18 other ways.
A completely different way.
That was really cool.
And it really opened up more of, okay, now I don't feel like I'm the only one who answers questions, or I don't feel like I never get to talk in class. And the ones who didn't want to talk, they could just go up and do something without having to use their own voice, but they still had a say in something. Loved that seemed to change as we went through the school year. It took a long time to get there, but as we moved along,
but you know what? Even at the first like early weeks of school, kids who I had known because I had taught them before, it was neat to see them in a different place and in a different interacting in a different way, because suddenly they had the freedom to use the gifts that never showed up in the class in a traditional classroom.
Right.
Suddenly their gifts mattered. We were giving them permission to bring them. And, you know, the kiddo I'm thinking of, like teaching the oldest group how to stop motion video because he figured it out first.
Right.
And the oldest kids being like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I want to do that. And, you know, they're looking to teachers to show them how to do it. And I'm like, no, the 8-year-old knows how to do it. Like, let's let him teach. And suddenly this kid who was never the hero in the last story was a hero in this, you know, in lots of moments, but certainly that one, where, and you just saw the transformation when they had that permission to be themselves, like they would just come to life in a new way, which was always so fun to see.
Well, I think because we were intentionally putting our whole school together every day. They went on a walk in the morning. They, you know, we had the time when they got together at the beginning of the school day, and all of those kind of lunch all together. They went to recess all together.
Just a reminder, we're K-8.
Right.
So this is kindergartners all the way to 8th graders doing all of those things together daily.
In that community, I feel like it made it safer for the younger kids to then want to have interactions with the older kids, because they already knew who they were. So it wasn't like just taking some 8-year-old and plopping them in front of a bunch of 13 and 14-year-olds. Now it's
That's
like,
a really good point. We were so intentional about we are a community all together, and really fostering that you can learn somebody from anybody, and you can learn something from anyone in the room, regardless of what age they are, or, you know, if they think like you or not.
Right.
And like you said, we, from the beginning, took a daily mile walk. I have pictures of our first walk ever, so I'll post a few from the back of those. But a lot of those just intentionalities of gathering as a community and hearing a common message every morning that we have done since day one. And I don't know that we knew what a big impact that was going to have. I'm glad we did it, but I don't know if I knew that was going to be so important.
I don't know either. And I think there were some days when, again, you get back into that kind of like traditional teacher mindset going, oh, I could be using this time for something else, and I really need to get the kids going. But then as rest, you really saw this is so important, and that we didn't have assigned seats at lunch, and the kids sometimes wanted to group together with their classes, but other times they wanted to sit with different kids across different classes and ages. And really was fun to be an observer in that. Remember that the lunchroom was ungodly loud.
It was so loud. And okay, another thing. Okay, the first year, I'm just going to name it because I can. We made so many we had a lot of stupid ideas. We being me.
No.
The royal we had a lot of stupid ideas. And one of those stupid ideas was that we would do everything together as a community, teachers included, all day long. Now, what I mean by that, not that we were all together all day long, but that we don't need breaks. We'll just give each other breaks we'll just tag in and tag out as needed. We'll all be on recess duty so that they see all of us equally there together. We'll all eat lunch, which in theory sounds so lovely. And in practice is a nightmare, because of course we need time to like prep a class or think about, going to the bathroom longer than 15 seconds, or, having lunch not in an ungodly loud, echoey gym. And so I think we did that the entire first year, though.
So too, again, I agree with you where you said theoretically it was a great idea.
I'm so sorry.
No, here's the thing. In practice, we absolutely needed breaks, and we didn't realize it. We were all, I think, I was 42-ish. I think that's how old I was. I don't remember. Yeah.
I don't know.
I do remember just thinking, okay, I had the energy to do this. We all kind of were in that young-ish mind frame. But going back to theoretically, it really was a good idea. And it helped us all, I think, gel a community.
I think so too. It did not give us the opportunity to handle things that needed to be handled.
Right.
Responding to parent email. Like there was a lot that it just didn't account for.
Absolutely.
I do think part of it was in the times that we were all together, we gelled so well that it was like, well, this is our time to be, because it wasn't like we had a teacher's lounge.
Right.
It wasn't like we had space to go be by ourselves. And so in that scenario, it kind of made sense.
Right.
It made it hard, but it kind of also made sense because there wasn't like a place to go and do something separate.
And because the kids were, when we got to recess with them, they were all pretty much contained in one area. The 5 of us, 6 of us could be out there, and we could also, socialize with each other while still being on a supervisory situation. Lunch was enjoyable other than the loud noises, and I'm not a loud noise person anymore. I play instruments and have drums be super loud. That's different.
Listen, I never enjoyed lunch in that building because it was so, and the kids were not being obnoxious.
No, not at all.
They were being normal, but it was literally this god awful echoey gym. It was a beautiful gym, but man, the sound doing anything in there was enough to make you want to lose your mind. I do think that because we did lunch like that is why we had everybody is silent and reads after lunch.
That was your idea anyway, that we would.
Was it?
Because we all like. Do you ever talk about
I don't know. It was
that?
like, it'd be nice to like have a break where everybody, like every single adult, every single kid just stops everything that you're doing and does reading rest.
I feel like we had a conversation when we were first talking about before school even started, and that
Probably
talking
at
about
Rio.
our favorite, probably at Rio, talking about our favorite times in school, and everybody had their favorite subject or whatever. But a lot of us said that sustained silent reading was one of our favorite times.
Oh, you're right.
And I feel like that we built that
bringing this
in
back.
to say, kids love this, even if they're not reading the whole time, even if they're just resting, that sustained and silent time was a great reset for kids who needed to actually, oops, I fell asleep for half an hour, right? That was a very necessary time. And especially because our K through 8, some of those littles and some of the older kids definitely needed some downtime to just do nothing. And I felt like that was every year of our school. I've had kids say that's one of my favorite parts of the day.
Absolutely. And even I'm kind of jumping ahead because I don't remember doing this the first year, but during that community time in the morning, we had full 30-minute community times where it was like, we're just going to be silent today. We're just going to put our feet up the wall and be silent today. And the number of kids, when you ask them, what was your favorite community time of the year, who would say, because they don't have an opportunity where nothing's expected of them, where there's no screen in front of them, where there's no, we just don't have opportunities for silence. And when we do, we don't always use them that way. And so the number of them that would tell us, that's my favorite. Reading rest continued to be, and we had kids who learned to love to read during reading rest. Right. That if they hadn't had the time to just explore, nobody was policing what they were doing or reading, or it was whatever you want.
And that's what I was going to say is they had choice. Reading rest time was not okay, let's go do group reading now, or you need to finish these pages by the end of reading rest. It was go choose a book, go find a quiet place to hunker down. And do you want me to turn the lights down? Yes, please. Do you want me to turn some music on? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Instrumental background. And they just ambient noise for quite a few kids. That was important to them. And you could see them just physically go.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
How awesome that was.
Even thinking, part of what was hard, I think, from the administrative hat, having the parents, and probably for you guys as teachers too, but having come from the mindset that every second in school must be productive and has to look productive in specific ways. And so not having a reading log where you're proving that you're reading during this time, or not having, well, that's a junk book, you're not going to read that during this time, or truly just letting them, if they needed a rest, they usually really needed a rest, right? It was overstimulating, whatever it was like a reset time. And I don't think we value those times enough in schools. And I think the first couple years, that time felt precious to us, but it also felt like it was hard to defend at times.
Did have some parents say they read at home. I require them to read for an hour at home every day. They don't need to do that in school. And I'm like, how much of this comes back to, I think I'd said it last week about society doesn't have a great hold on what a kid's brain needs and does and how it's developing. A child, whether that child is 5 or 18 or anywhere in between, to be 100% on for a 7 or 8 hour school day, that's a lot. I mean, I can't function.
It's taxing for all of us.
It totally is. I can't function that way as a full-blown adult. So I kept thinking back to, those conversations that I would kind of help parents along to say, I hear what you're saying, and I love that you value reading at home. Here's another reason that we're doing it at school, and it's not just about the reading. They're not little machines. And
especially coming from the loud lunch, it's a stimulus of the morning of doing all these things together, and then sustained learning and, all of these pieces. It's like, it makes sense that we need a break from the stimulus, where we can either get lost in a story or we truly just detach and let ourselves relax. Yeah.
Well, and that even goes back down to the recess discussion of how we had 2 recesses plus the morning walk every day. And there were quite a few parents who were like, well, my kid doesn't really need that because we
have fought for that every year, and we've kept it every year because we're not giving it up. It's too important.
We have gymnastics, or we have dance, or we have soccer, we have baseball. I hear you. That is an activity, but that still is different from recess. And how we have so much research on how beneficial recess is to kids, and that it's not structured, it's free, that they have rules, and they have, here are some boundaries for what we're going to do at recess. However, we're not going to dictate what you're doing because right now that's for you to do, and how vital that is to a kid's development.
The free play. Yeah. The non-adult directed free play was so important. And especially the demographic we're in tends to overload kids' schedules and all the best intents, right? But they never have a chance to just be truly not adult directed and just be a kid, and how important we saw that was. Okay, I'm going to go back and paint a little bit of a picture of the space we were in. It was these big open spaces. You were in a classroom with the youngest and one class older than you, one group of kids older than you. And so there were 3 of you. There were no divider walls in this space. We at best had rolly carts with shared, we had no money. So we had rolly carts that had shared for 3 classes supplies.
And books that had been donated.
Yep. And then really that was it. We had tables. I remember Nancy's group rarely used tables. They were mostly on the floor with clipboards all the time. I think that was her preference, and the kids loved it. They were sprawled out constantly. But 3 of you being in one room, tell me the best things about that and tell me the worst things about that from a teacher perspective.
The best thing was seeing what other classes were doing. Also, there were lots of options for, hey, let's do this together, the 3 of us, and then off together and then split apart, or maybe it was 2 of us. It just depended. I grew up in a school that was the open concept, so there were no classroom walls. They had dividers sometimes. There were no walls. So that was something that I was used to, and I can't have silence to think. I have to have something going all the time. So I think that backfired. That open concept didn't go past the 70s, longer than that, I think.
Until we reintroduced it at Anastasis.
So there were benefits to that. And even hey, I need to run to the restroom really quickly. There's 2 other adults in the room, right? Anything
Well,
like that.
and I'm right outside the door,
Exactly,
like
yeah.
literally. Yeah.
I think there were benefits that we didn't always know that we were experiencing at the time. The
Yeah.
hard part was definitely for the kids who had struggles with kind of attention when there's other things happening, especially physical movement. So if one of the younger class kids were moving around and mine were trying to concentrate, it was too much.
Squirrel.
But we also had the option, hey, let's just go outside. Or there was another room, that pulse room. Sometimes we would go there.
Yeah.
Other times
We snuck in that room. We didn't really, that wasn't really our room.
we used it every once in a while, but we could go in the hallway. We learned to take advantage of space that we had access to so that it wasn't, well, I have to stay in this one area and never leave this area. So I know that we got to be kind of, we were very flexible.
We had no choice but to be flexible.
Sometimes if it was, okay, we're going to do something as a group and then break into small groups or go do independent work or whatever it might have been, the kids had a choice. Can I sit at a table? Could I go sit on the floor? Could I go sit out in the hallway? So we had enough that was actually pretty easy, that they could kind of determine what was best for them. And there were some times when they didn't always make the best choices. So we would say, you can't do that now.
You lost that privilege. Right. Yeah. I do think that it helped us give some agency back to the kids in an unexpected way.
Right.
Of being able to say, like, what do you need right now? So they're learning themselves as just people in space and what, getting them to think about, what do I need? Do I need quiet, or are they like you and I can be in a space? And I remember you had a student who had some sensory things going on, some ADD things going on, and it was truly sometimes impossible for them to be in that kind of a classroom space when they were needing to learn. And so we literally put a tent in the hallway for this kiddo to have a separate space where the sensory, we're removing all senses except for whatever he had going on. But the permission of, I need to go work in my tent was huge, and I think back to, it was kind of funny, when people would come in tour and they're like, tell us about the tent. But I think, the creativity and agility of saying, we see this as being a problem. We're very constrained by the place we're in. What can we do?
Right.
And that being a solution that we came up with together, I think, like, thinking back, how brilliant, we didn't have an office they could go to. We didn't have, like, there was a hallway, but the hallway could be busy because, as you said, like, anybody at any time was going out and using it. And so to really give him a space where he could go and he knew and could advocate, like, right now I need it versus, well, is that really a need, or am I just trying to escape right now? And learning that difference was huge.
And helping him to, like you said, to advocate, but also to look back and say, okay, what is the issue that's causing me frustration right now? Or what is the sensory issue right now? And helping him to be able to describe it and name it. And that, is this something that the tent's going to make better? Or, like you said, am I just escaping when I need to try to work through this? And then there was often some negotiation, which I felt was actually a really good thing and skill for him to learn. Became a really good communicator. There were times when I'd push him and say, I would like you to stay in the classroom or this area for a little bit longer.
Right. Or even, class discussions could be hard.
Right.
And so getting him to stay for, let's finish this discussion when you're going to work, I'll give you that.
Absolutely.
That choice.
I was so proud of him because he really, actually towards the end of the year, was really starting to say, to go in there right now. Kid and I want to go in and we're going to look up this video that shows us something about dinosaurs, because they decided they wanted to learn about dinosaurs. And then they'd come back and they'd say, is it okay if we go? Because this was a no homework school. This was the big thing about Anastasis, right?
Yeah.
The no homework school.
The no homework school.
They would come back and they'd say, is it all right if we go home and learn more about dinosaurs? And I looked at them and I was like, are you asking me permission or what are you asking me right now? I'm like, you can learn whenever you want.
Yeah, but it's homework.
But that was like, again, a moment for us was they associate learning only happening at school.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to talk with them and say, hey,
unless they're forced to do it at home.
I'm like,
Yeah.
you guys, if this is something you're interested in and you have your parents' permission to look something up in a book or on your iPad, go for it. And then
they'd come in with these amazing things to
Yeah.
show us. And we're like,
they
Yeah.
were so excited.
so
And
cool.
that was, again, kind of eye-opening that I think because I, as a learner myself, I was always like, I learn all the time. I didn't
Mhm.
really think that kids only associated learning with school. And I'm like, well, then
I think what they do is they associate learning with a teacher. I don't even
Yeah.
think it's with school. I think I associate learning with a teacher.
Yeah.
So unless a teacher gives it to me, it's not real
it's not real
learning.
learning. And then we
Yeah.
would have discussions. I'm like, well, what kind of things do you do at home? And they, I build this or I bake or any of those kind of conversations. And I'm like, okay, well, that's learning. And explain to me or share something with us that you like to do just for the fun of it, but you've learned a lot. And then they would come and like, I learned how to crochet and I'm going to make these hats, right? For everybody in
Mhm.
the class. And then, do you think I could sell these? I'm like, people would pay money for that. Sure. I mean, again, all of those kind of like,
Yeah.
they gave themselves permission eventually to do things that they might not have done if it was just the course of regular homework.
Yeah. And it was so cool because once that happened for one
Mhm.
student, it was like this domino effect of it was like, wait, we can do that? Like it was this permissionless thing that once they realized that it was okay and that they could do it, the way that they started to bring us things
Mhm.
or, learn on their own and or make connections back to the inquiry, because we did have inquiry blocks. That was one of the nice things is everyone in the entire school was learning the same inquiry block at the same time. That
Right.
doesn't mean you were learning the same thing at the same time, but the guiding question for the whole school was the same for that 5-week period. And so that's where you could work with those other teachers or start with them or do projects, or there was overlap
Mhm.
opportunities because, and we kept doing that every year of Anastasis because that was one of those things I think we hit on a little bit by accident that turned into this like beautiful collaboration of everyone being able to push into each other's learning space and share resources, kids included. Like when
Right.
they realized they could see Miss Nancy's team, Nancy was learning XYZ, and they would come across it in their own learning. It was like, can I go show
Mhm.
Miss Nancy this? Or can I go show one of the kids this? And they would be so excited to like that cross of resources and things that they were figuring out. And I have never seen that happen in a school that I've worked in the way that it happened that first year once they like hit on that they could do that.
It definitely felt more organic, wasn't prescribed.
Yeah.
I think that's also where that whole idea of discovery being such an important, first step in learning, and that you're missing that when it's boxed curriculum. You're
Mhm.
missing that when you're following only what the teacher wants you to learn. There's a kid that I've ever known who's discovered something on their own that, especially if it's outside of school, always wants to talk about that thing. And it
Mhm.
isn't because no one's ever learned it before. It's, guess what I learned, right?
Yeah.
And those kind of, in traditional schooling, that happens less and less as they get older. You think about what kindergartners want to come up and share with you all the time, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Compared to an 8th grader. And this is not me slamming 8th graders, but at that point, that's not important to them anymore. And I
Right.
keep wondering, and I'm speaking generally, but
I
it's
think
kinda
it is
sad.
important to them, but we've forced it out of them
Yeah.
by that point.
Right. It doesn't become
Um,
a thing that they want to share with the adults all the time.
Yeah, I think we saw that as we got into years at Anastasis and we had kids kind of go through, a few Anastasis classrooms and then become a 7th, 8th grader, because those kids were still like wanting to share and
Right.
like, look what I did, And so I do think that is an outcome of how we do school more
Mhm.
than factor of age. I think they'd still be excited to share if we didn't train it out of them.
I think so. And there of course are outliers. There's always, one kid who's like a lot of, I think the ones that were most in common were, I learned this cheat code in a video game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was almost all of them had something like that in common, with that they would share across with each other. And this was, before you could really even play with someone else through Minecraft, for example, because that didn't exist back in 2011. But they would come in and say, "Oh, how did you get to that level?" And then they would share, and they were all super excited about that. And I think there are a lot of adults who really respect that, because that's collaborative learning. It's sharing, it's getting to different levels. And I feel like, again, a lot of educators tried to gamify everything because they saw that in video games. Like, "Oh, look, we apply this to our school." I'm like, nah, let kids have their things, right? We don't need to act like a video game, but take the principles and apply it to what you're doing.
But it does show what happens when they have authentic audience who's doing something that they have this mutual, engagement in. And part of us being paperless was everything they were doing was they would either turn it in. They had Evernote portfolios that year, and then they all had blogs that they were keeping. And so a lot of their communication and their interaction, anything they did was not just for the teacher. They were seeing what each other were doing and what they were learning. And that authentic audience, certainly we saw that shift how they were thinking about their learning as time went on.
Being able to think about their audience differently through those blogs. And I started with paper blogs. I think you brought that up earlier. Teach, is that Karen McMillan? Who
I think it is.
I think
so.
And that with her
I'm almost
students.
positive.
Yeah, I'm too.
I'm almost positive it was Karen.
Showing kids, okay, we're going to take sticky notes and you're going to write a bunch of information down, and then you're going to do a little kind of like a gallery walk and go around and read what the kids have written, and then you are going to take a sticky note and write a response to what they had written. And that example kind of helped prepare them for what they were going to do on their blogs. And especially once we were able to open up those blogs to outside the school, I know we shared a lot with a lot of our educator friends, say, "Hey, can you and or your students respond to what our kids are writing?" And that was like,
it was a whole other level.
And they
it was
learned
really cool
to write differently in that sense, that, again, they weren't trying to guess what I wanted them to write. They're looking for feedback on their writing and also taking it, I feel like, a critique. It felt like, oh, I never thought about that somebody else might consider this point.
Do you remember one of the hardest parts that first year was parents following those blogs?
Yes.
Because they were so used to, if it is online, it must be perfect.
Yeah.
If it's shared publicly, it must be perfect. And they didn't understand that that was part of the process.
Right.
Again, all coming from such a more like fixed traditional view of education. And so it was really hard those first years to help parents understand, like, no, this is actually really, like, the process you see unfolding is really important.
Right.
There's a reason we're not stepping into this too soon, because then we're going to kill the learning that's happening right now.
For the
and
kids,
it was so uncomfortable being in the position of administrator, but also you guys being, questioned as teachers. And we as educators are seeing the genius and the beauty of all of this unfolding. That was a hard hurdle to get over with those parents.
Part of it was
some of them,
not all of them, but some it was like, I don't want my kid to be seen as someone who can't spell or who doesn't have perfect grammar. Wow, all of her Friday folders from the last school, she had perfect writing and everything else. And they're like, no, that was because the teacher had already edited it.
That's because the teacher did it. Yeah.
And it came home already corrected. Here, we're going to see the process. And I remember I would say, I want to see progress from an August blog compared to a May blog or blog post. And if I go in and edit all of their spelling and grammar, then you're only going to see the polished piece. You're not going to see the growth from August all the way to May. And there were times when I'd say, okay, we are going to publish something that has been edited, corrected, all of those things. But then we would note it on the blog to say, this has been edited by Mrs. Baldwin or with Mrs. Baldwin.
Yep.
we've been working on this particular piece of writing for the last 2 weeks, and here's what it looked like as a draft, and now here's the final published piece. Blog posts that were more journal-like, we didn't want those to be polished because I wanted them to get their thoughts out.
One of the things that had led to in all of our years was kids who were not afraid to show their learning in real time and to celebrate their learning in real time. And that's not something I experienced in a school where the goal was the end finished product.
Right.
So that was neat to see. So on that note, that made assessment look very different. And I'm not sure we knew how to do it really in the early days. We knew it couldn't look like traditional assessment practices. We knew it couldn't have a grade or a score. We knew that it had to be different. And so we tried some tools. I remember one of the first professional developments that we did together as a staff into the year. I had just seen Saturday Night Live, and it was the Hidden Valley Ranch
HBR
skit, HBR.
With Melissa McCarthy.
And it was so funny. But, I remember watching it and then making notes in my phone or wherever. And my husband being like, what are you doing right now? Just enjoy what we're doing. But it was so brilliant because it showed it. If you've never seen the clip, I'll drop a link in our show notes. But it's such a brilliant clip to think about assessment practices, because as soon as there is a carrot dangled, it becomes absurd. It just goes off the rails completely. And that's what we were saying with kids too, is as soon as they would try to introduce even their own carrots and sticks of like, well, if I do this, what are you going to give me? And it's like, what are you talking about? We're not giving anything. We're going to like high five you that we're all learning together. But they're so conditioned to learning has to have a grade or a score or an accolade, or it has, all of these things. Well, can I get an award if I do it the best? And it's like, no, we're not doing that. And the number of parents who asked for the awards and we're like, no, we're not doing that. We're done with that.
And the assumption that kids aren't going to do the work unless there's a grade. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, unless the stick is there.
Right. And I'm like, okay, so you're basically saying that if it's worthwhile, then kids are going to do it because there's a grade assigned, or are they just going to do it because it's worthwhile and then they're excited about learning? And then also, what happens about those kids who don't actually care if they fail? Because we see that in traditional schooling all the time. I don't care what my grade is.
Yeah.
So now how do you get them to do that?
That was my husband and my brother. We're both like, that does nothing for me.
What are you going to do? Yeah. Or I don't care if I get the worst grade above failing. I don't care.
Right.
So how do you then motivate the kids to do the work? If it's not worthwhile, but you're using that grade as the carrot, well, that carrot doesn't exist for a lot of kids. They don't care. So now what are you saying about grades? Are you grading behavior? Are you grading actual learning, learning a skill, moving from one level of understanding with that skill or concept and then growing? Grades don't make sense if you're actually trying to measure learning.
Right. Well, and we talked a lot about measurement, doesn't do a lot for kids. Right. It's for the adult.
Right.
Right. It might give them a shame-based message or like a pat on the back that they're the best, but like it's not shaping the learning at all.
No.
Measuring in that way. And so we talked a lot about how assessment is like the Latin root is assidere, it's sit beside. How are we actually sitting beside shaping the learning as kids are going so that the learning is for them.
Right.
And not just for these other
crazy metric that
people.
Doesn't make any sense. And that they're actually getting feedback that is timely, meaningful to the process of learning. So if they're at a very novice level and they don't understand, how do I know how to help them get to the next level? And then how do I give them feedback that helps them get to the next level?
Right.
I do remember having a meeting with a parent, and he'd said, I basically showed him the work that his child had been doing, and he was praising her work because it was really good. And he's like, yeah. Just tell me, what percentage grade is this? And I was like, I'm sorry?
I remember this moment.
Yeah. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. He goes, you're telling me a bunch of stuff about this, but I need to know what percentage grade this would be. Is it like a 70% or what? And I said, I just basically showed you that she has mastered this skill to the point where she could teach it to another student. So I said, if you can tell me what grade that would be, I'm like, I guess 100%, but can she do it consistently? Yes.
But based on what?
But
yeah.
Exactly. What are you asking me? If I give her a test with 5 questions or 10 questions or 100 questions, what percentage she'll get correct on that? And I said, do you see what you're asking me? And he could not get there.
It's so hard when that's been the conditioning
Right.
of society for so long. It's hard to shift. And that, I think, was hard. It's been hard every year that we've had Anastasis. I think in more recent years, it's gotten easier to communicate about the learning in a way that is non-traditional because more schools are adopting competency-based and different things. And so they're more, they still may not fully understand it, but they're at least more used to seeing it. Those early days, we may as well been speaking another language.
Absolutely.
Because they just could not get away from, but is this an A? An A according to who? An A according to what metric? An A, like they just didn't understand how much different was in there. In those early years, we used some really imperfect tools that I actually don't know if I even want to shout out, just because.
I think maybe not, just because, again, it wasn't.
Let's not shout them out.
Yeah.
I've probably talked about them somewhere along the line on some blog, but the first one that we used didn't work well for us. It was imperfect. We were basically tracking standard by standard. Had they mastered it? Had they not? Were they in progress? I think it was like red, yellow, green. The red, yellow, green was super problematic because parents would see red and immediately think
They're
failing.
Yeah.
And that wasn't always what it meant. It might mean they haven't learned it yet, right? There were like levels to that. The other problematic thing is what you had to choose a grade for the student, or actually a grade for the teacher to teach. And it only had standards from that grade level. And we're like, well, they're learning standards well above their grade level. Then what? And there was no way to capture what was actually happening because it boxed us in.
Right. And for some students, they needed to have some work that might have been below their assigned grade level, which we didn't assign them grade levels, but they all came from schools where they did.
Yes.
Again, terminology that has not left.
Right. And we've never associated kids with a grade level. We had mixed age classrooms, so that was not a thing that we were doing at Anastasis. But again, society at large, what grade are you in?
Right.
Everywhere else they were still talking, and they had all come from, I'm in first or third or kindergarten or whatever.
So there wasn't a lot of flexibility with some of those early tools to pull standards that were appropriate for each kid, even though that's what we were doing.
And when we did, parents immediately had all these flags raised of, well, what do you mean you're grading my third grader at a second grade level? And it's like, well, because we care that they understand at that level before we're trying to move on. Right. But it was such a hard mindset shift. That first year, that was probably the biggest source of tension between us and parents. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I'm a parent, so I feel like I can relate to anytime a parent is told something that emotional ties to your kid is behind. And that's not what we were saying, but there's that whole kind of mentality where, oh, my kid's behind. And then
they needed a detox too, right? Like really, and we learned that.
I talk about Parent University for a little bit because I think that was one of the best things we ever did. One of my favorite things that we had parents come do. You talk about the baggage one first, and then I'll talk about my example.
So I think we landed on Parent University because we knew we were doing something that was going to create those moments of tension. And so it's like we're going to have to re-educate a little bit. Like we're going to have to deconstruct what we think we know about education and then like kind of reconstruct what it is we're doing so that parents can not feel like this is just a free for all, which I think there were times they probably did feel that way just because it was, we're the no homework, we're the no grades, we're the no, there are all these things that we're defining ourselves by what we're not. And so we had to kind of reconstruct, well, let's help parents along on this journey to understand this is research-based, number one. It's not just us going completely rogue. Like there's reason and intention behind this. So the very first Parent University, I think, was actually back to school night. I think we coupled them the first year. And Matthew brilliantly was like, let's have them all bring luggage. Let's just have them bring luggage. And so these sweet parents had no idea what they were in for, but they brought literal luggage. And we nonsensically had them wheel their luggage from one room to another. Nothing was really changing about our message or what we were doing. Like there was no intention behind other than to literally make them walk around this church with luggage.
Right.
And we talked about how we all come with baggage from our own education experiences and how we can try to lug that baggage with us all over the place, or we can consciously choose to let's leave the baggage in its place and understand that it is baggage, that we all come with this. And so we talked about some of the ways we knew that was going to come up and show up in, you're not going to get a Friday folder every week. That just isn't how it's going to look. We're going to show you authentic learning, but it's not going to be measured the way that you are used to it being measured. It's just not going to look quite the same. So we tried to set up, I think, the year well in that way. I think it landed better for some parents probably than others. Others were probably like, what the heck was I doing here with this luggage? I don't know.
I feel like a lot of them got to talk and share about some of the things that they considered baggage. And you could tell, even for some of them, it was, 25, 30 years later, it was still heavy on their hearts. And first of all, I was so appreciative of them being vulnerable enough to share it, but then also to say, this is why we are doing what we're doing, and we don't want to do that to your child.
Yeah. The conversation, the discussion was so good for us too, because then we you had an idea, that dad who came in and was like, but tell me the score. You heard the baggage that he came with, the fears that he came with.
Right.
So even though we were still stuck in that place, there was at least more empathy for why, why that worldview or why we're so worried about the A, because that was a hard, if I remember correctly, he wasn't the A student. No. And so it was like, I want to make sure my kid's okay is really what he was asking.
Right. And then trying to understand what learning looked like on a day-to-day basis, because again, with their only frame of reference being their own education, it was very difficult for them to know what it looked like in the classroom. And again, like as I'd said before, the kids kept coming home and saying, well, we haven't really done any learning yet. We're still just doing fun things. I'm like, no, you guys are really learning. We don't
do math. That was the one that we got the most often, is we don't really do math at Anastasis. And
like, yes, you're doing math every day. You just don't
always, all the time.
It doesn't look the way that you're used to it. So I remember one of the things that we did with Parent University was we invited the parents to come and say, you're going to pretend that you're in the classroom as a student, and you want to be, you can pretend to be your child if you'd like. And then each of us as teachers led an inquiry session and project, and how they would need to basically do that day as if they were their own kid. And it was
something you had actually done with the kids.
Yes.
You had done the same lesson. So they were doing a lesson their child had done, which was cool.
And, the kids knocked it out of the park. And then the parents got in and they're like, wait, I have to, what do you want me to do? And I remember one mom goes, I can't do this. She's like, does my kid do this? Yes, your child does this very well. We didn't let them struggle for too long, but I remember at the end going around and asking, okay, tell me what you felt. Tell me what you learned. What did you think? And they were like, first of all, this is harder than anything I ever did in school. I remember them saying that specifically, and I said, okay, tell me more. Why? And they're like, I have to think more. I have to think more. It's not just knowing answers to certain things. And I said, okay, so your kids are really doing, we didn't talk about the knowledge at that time, but we were talking about different levels of learning. I said, so it's not just memorize and then show that you know this. It's how are we applying it? What do we think about this? What happens if it looks different and we do it this way? What do we think? Is it even the right thing to do? And they were kind of going along and listening. And I remember mom's just holding her head. She goes, my head kind of hurts right now. I said, okay, tell me more. And she's like, this is just a lot more than I expected. And I'm like, this is good that you're experiencing this because your kids, so we don't do exactly this every single day, but you do see that when
there's
they're
a lot of it.
Oh, for sure. And when they're coming home and they're tired or they're cranky, like it's because they really have been using a lot of their brain. It's not just a lot of passive learning. They're very active. They're contributing. They're collaborating all the time. Well, how do you grade this? That was one of the questions. How do you, and they stopped themselves.
You're like, great question.
Well, they did stop because they knew that we didn't do grades. And they're like, well, how are you? I'm like, are you asking me how I assess this? Yes, that. And I said, well, I'm watching all of the time. Are they learning to ask better questions when they're they're starting an inquiry project? Are they listening to each other? Are they writing down things to go look up? What are their research skills like? How have those things improved? So that's all things that I have to actively watch and observe to assess.
How are they talking about their learning? Yeah.
If I send them home to do this, I miss all of that. And that is one reason why we don't do homework. And they're like, oh, and I said, there's a lot of things that they're still doing at home that I'm not seeing them do because they're choosing to. So all of this is very valuable information for me to assess what level of understanding do they really have at this point in time.
Yeah. It's so cool. That particular parent university, I think, was our best ever attended. I think so. We had nearly 100% attendance. And it was because we were all doing this new thing together. So everybody was like eager to see, you know, what is this all about and how does this work? And I think we even primed them with Seth Godin had just come out with that book, and the name is escaping me in this moment. Shoot. I'm drawing a blank. We're going to have to look it up. But he basically talked about the industrial model of education. He gave it away for free as a PDF book. And so we sent it to all of the families and said, you know, in preparation for this parent university, please, you know, either read or skim this book. As soon as you say it, my brain's... No. This is his... I think it's called Stop Stealing Dreams. Does that come up?
That's not...
All right. Now I got to know.
I have to look it up. There's so many.
Yes, it's called Stop Stealing Dreams. And I should have trusted myself. I was second guessing. I'm like, no, it's because it's Dreams of Education. It can't be that. Stop Stealing Dreams by Seth Godin. Yeah. He shared this the year that we opened Anastasis, and it happened to like coincide with the parent university. And I was like, we got to have parents like to prime the pump of it should look different. And then for them to actually experience how it's different. And I don't know how many of them read before they came in, but pretty cool that they had that experience. And I wished we tried to do that same parent university over the years. And sometimes it was really well attended and some not. And I can't really land on a theme there other than it, you know, just some years were busier than others.
Well, and I think the set of parents that we had that year, I'm grateful for them that they, again, took a leap of faith, right? And just kind of jumped in. For a lot of them who had the privilege of being able to attend things at night, know that wasn't always the case in every year. So I think that played a huge part of it too.
And I don't know, it seemed that parents were prioritizing it, especially at the beginning of the first year. It got harder as, you know, club sports and things like that were happening. Right. And, you know, everybody's torn in lots of different directions for their time. But I loved that those first parent universities were so cool. And the things that we were able to do with parents, kind of pulled back the curtain in what their kids were doing each day.
Right. And
in really
and
neat
even
ways.
then, and them to see that it doesn't have to be I learned this, I do a worksheet, I turn it in, move on to the next thing. That that inquiry lends itself to being spread across multiple weeks, and you have maybe small projects or learning targets throughout, helping them to see that not every kid is going to get there at the exact same time and how important that was. That we still would put in some deadlines. You can't have learning just go on and on and on and on without something focused, because that, again, takes a lot of kids and that removes the discipline piece of it. Discipline piece. So if I have a deadline, is it an arbitrary deadline or does it meaningful for a reason? Because we decided, like in a traditional school, well, you have to finish this by the end of the quarter or the semester. That's kind of an arbitrary deadline, but kids know that.
Yeah.
With those blocks, we had some flexibility with our inquiry blocks. At the same time, we wanted to make sure that kids knew, well, need to move on. You can continue learning this if you choose to, but I want you to be able to get this project done. So I think like one of the last projects we did, we were learning about transportation. My class was.
I have pictures. I'll add them.
They're so funny about it, but that's the one where I completely stepped back and knew things were not going to work. But the idea was I said, you need to have some more transportation. I don't care which one it is. It needs to travel at least a meter, whether that's vertical, horizontal, up to you. But you can start it and then you can't touch it after that. You cannot help propel that thing forward. So a lot of them are like, oh, I'm just going to use, vinegar and baking soda because that's a great propellant. I'm like, okay. So I sat there and I was like, some of them use, I think one little girl used a bottle with Mentos and Diet Coke, and then her projectile came out of the bottle and it was like a rocket. Well, hers worked, but most of the rest of them failed because they built like little cars. And
I feel like that might have been the only one that did work.
There was one other that worked, and I can't remember off the top of my head. I cannot remember what it was.
Was it a rubber band?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
But the ones that tried to use the vinegar, like there were 3 or 4 of them that were all like, oh, this is a great idea. And they knew that the vinegar and the baking soda would react, but they didn't realize because they didn't do any more research. And I kept kind of walking in and saying, I'm wondering if there's anything else that you need to know or you put this, oh, no, it'll work. I'm like, okay. So words, and of course, they all failed. And they were so disappointed. And I was like, let's look at this as you're not just failing. It didn't work. You're right. But why did it not work? Because that's the part that's really, really important.
And why did the Mentos and why did the other one? What was it about that one?
So they went back, and that's when they really started doing more research. So they're like, oh, we should have had a cone in there and it needed to build up. And okay. The writing that happened after that activity was the best writing that they did.
Good. It was so good. Yeah.
Told you blogs are not accessible anymore, and I wish that I probably do have them in a document somewhere. I'm in such a digital hoarder. I need to go back and look through, but writing was so good. And they were like, Baldwin kept asking us, is there anything else you need to learn? And we were so sure that it was going to work that we didn't even test it or read more to see if this is what we needed.
When you think you're an expert, there's no reason to keep learning, right?
And what a great activity. I didn't plan for them to fail. I really thought that they would all figure it out. But what a great activity for them, especially towards the end of the year when they had experienced so much success moving into that, oh gosh, we did have a deadline. We didn't make it and it didn't work. And instead of feeling really like they did feel pretty bad about it, but after a while, they're like, oh yeah, this is what we learned. And that was something that I shared with the parents and said that piece right there was more important than anything that they had learned up to that point.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So crazy how much learning we all did that year. I'm remembering another major fail on my part of those rose-colored glasses, thinking one thing would work and then realizing pretty quickly it did not, which is when we designed the model, we thought it would work to have a 15-to-1 student-teacher ratio part of the day and a 12-to-1 or 10-to-1 the other part of the day. And the thought process was during inquiry, we'll have the bigger group together. There's more opportunity for discussion, all of the things. And then during the time where it's more independent, where we're working on specific standards for that child and reading, writing, math, we'll have smaller class size so that you can have more dedicated. And we did this for what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
I think it was almost a whole month.
Was it?
Maybe, yeah.
And it was a fail, a hard fail. One, I had never worked in an inquiry-based school, even though I started one. So the first thing that I realized is, inquiry happens all the time. It never stops. Like when that's your philosophy. And so things were happening during the inquiry time period that could have really enhanced what was happening in all of the rest. But because that teacher wasn't there, it was this like real disconnect weirdness. The other thing that didn't work well is we were splitting one of the classes into two. And so some of them would go up and some of them would go down age-wise. And even though it like overlapped the ages, the kids and the parents saw it as a promotion or demotion, and it fractured that class. And so I think we just looked at it one day and we're like, what are we doing here? Why are we doing this? And so we just landed on it should be 12 to 1 all day.
Right. It was really
and
hard.
So we hired that teacher to be full-time.
Yeah.
But gosh, duh. In retrospect, it seems so obvious. But while we were planning, it was like, oh yeah, this will work great.
I think, again, coming from a traditional model, when what your student is doing in math may or may not affect what they're doing, we know that it does, but
we don't teach like it does.
Exactly. Math is siloed, language arts is siloed, history or studies is siloed, and that's not how it was working. And I know the very first that we had with parents did work with Morgan. 2 of us teachers were talking to a parent, and I realized how much I didn't know their kids.
Yeah.
Because she saw them for something that was like this, and I only saw this piece. And it was really hard as a teacher to then know how to interact with that kid. And again, as you said, inquiry happens all the time. There were things that just felt like this isn't going to work long term because it doesn't feel any different than traditional learning at that point.
Yeah,
it did. But what we were doing was different. But
totally. One of the things I love that has always been true at us is we're not afraid to name it and change it immediately. So it's because there's no like bureaucracy to go through. It's just literally, this isn't working. Here's why it's not working. We decide that as a team, right? You guys are like, this doesn't feel good.
Right.
From any standpoint, it's not working well. We knew we could pivot. As Matthew always said, we can do whatever we want. We make the rules. And so we were making the rules. And so we were able to literally have this discussion on a Friday and have it changed on a Monday. The other thing I loved about that is parents could see we're reacting to what's actually happening with your child rather than saying your kid needs to fit what we've decided is how this is going to go.
Or that we know that I was going to say that we knew that it was wrong, but we have to wait a whole year to change it.
Yes.
The fact that we went to the families and said, we see this, it's not working. It's not what's best for your kids. We're going to change it now. They're like, bring it on.
Yep. And they supported in lovely ways. And then I think it was 100% support across the board. I don't think we got any pushback for that particular decision. But then what I love too is being able to go to the kids and say, yeah, we thought this was going to work. It's not working. Like we were living what we were asking them to do as well.
Right.
And we were able to pivot pretty quickly to own, publicly that this didn't work. We thought it would work this way. It didn't work this way. And so here's why we're changing it. And I think that went a long way. Those micro moments of just the kids seeing us, quote unquote, fail or make a bad call and then be able to change. That is not something I know that the kids I had taught previously had seen in the previous school. So it was really nice to be able to do that as a group. And I think too, for all of the staff to realize if we tell them this is not working, we're heard and it's going to change. Right. We're all going to change it together.
One was very apparent that it wasn't working. I think
that one was really apparent.
It wasn't a slow burn. It was, I don't think we can keep doing this.
Mm-hmm. And budget wise, that was a hard call to make because I think part of why we thought that might work well had to do with budget. And so from a, admin perspective, there was those concerns of here's the first bump of we weren't quite expecting that we're now paying a full-time instead of a part-time, and how does that change things and what might we need to think differently about.
Yeah.
And I actually don't know what we did to make that work. I think we got lucky. I think we had padded the budget enough that it worked, but I don't know that we changed something with intention on that end. I mean, maybe we did. Maybe we thought we were going to spend this here. Now that's not there to spend. So it's, we're spending it on people instead. But that was one of those big midstream changes that I was like, oh, this has got to look different.
We also had the Monday through Thursday was in the building, and then every Friday was supposed to be a learning trip for every class.
For the whole school. Yeah.
It was a half day. And we also found out that wasn't sustainable for the whole school year. Not only because we didn't have transportation other than parents, also because it just didn't, it felt like you get going on something and then all of a sudden you have to leave and go on a trip, and then you don't see the kids again until Monday. And then it was like, oh gosh, we aren't really able to do the things that we think we need to be doing.
And to find a trip that, one, would take 54 students all at once, and two, that was appropriate for kindergartners through eighth graders.
Right.
And we didn't want to always be, it wasn't always that a museum was what made sense for that block.
Right.
Museum's easy, K-8, but there were other things that it was like, we want to go see a play. Okay, well, what's appropriate for kindergarten that will keep the attention of eighth graders? It was those kind of things that I found a picture of the Adams County Playhouse.
Yes.
From year one. Michelle may or may not remember that trip because she was
full on into migraine.
You were full into a migraine, and that was a rough trip for you. But you still went like a champ.
I think I ended up sitting in a quiet room for a while, but that was super cool. And because we had gone as a staff, we had husband and I went.
It was a mystery playhouse.
Yeah.
So it was like solving a mystery altogether.
The kids loved it. They talked about that trip for a long time. The stock show is an entire school.
Yeah,
that was fun and interesting.
Show.
And
we did the Da Vinci Museum that year. So we did do some museums. We did some service things all together. We did one where how did that work? We did like a giving scavenger hunt where we dropped them off in a neighborhood, a random neighborhood. It was one of the kids' neighborhoods, but we dropped them off in a wealthier neighborhood. Lots of parents were there. We had different groups, and they went door to door, and they were doing a scavenger hunt for things that we were collecting for an organization that we were working with. Yeah, we did some unique trips that year, and it was so hard to find parents the sustainability of, we're going to do a half day. The second half of the day is, we did that the full year, but I think we stopped expecting it to happen every single Friday, or it changed what we expected to happen every Friday. It wasn't
school every Friday after a while. Also within walking distance of a library. So a lot of times
we did a lot of the library. You're right.
And there was a park that wasn't too far. Actually, we had to walk through the park to get to the library. So I know we did a lot of those kind of trips too. It's so funny how, like, what's that, 14 years ago, my brain is still like, even though I read through some documents and blog posts, it's like, oh yeah, there were some things that keep popping up into your brain. You go, oh yeah, we did that.
Yeah. We went on like hikes together. Yeah, we did all kinds of things. So, but that is one thing we changed in subsequent years, where we decided maybe field trips can happen by class, and maybe it can happen, any day of the week. And when it makes sense for everybody to go, then we figure it out.
Right.
But rather than trying to force it be a whole school, we were thinking it was going to be a community bonding. And it was that first year. It was just so hard to find things that were authentic to what was happening in the inquiry block and in the classroom. And two, we were excluding ourselves from experiences that were really cool, that would have been cool to bring into that inquiry block, because it was like, well, it's not K-8, or they can't take 54. So it kind of hindered us in some unexpected ways that we changed later on. So much learning that first year.
I think as it's always fun to go back and to look at not only the kids and how they grew or the work that they did and how we adapted to every time we knew that we can do this better and maybe we try this instead. Also as a teacher and learning about how I was teaching and how I was learning myself, the amount of planning and preparation that it took to do something that was completely different. And again, as I had said before, that, we were all kind of people who felt comfortable doing some improvisation, or if I have to pivot really quickly and change how I do this, that's not always easy, even when you feel like you're good at doing that. And I know in, other years, we've had some staff who've not felt as comfortable doing that. And it can be a huge learning curve going into inquiry. But I that first year, we all learned so much, and just talking with each other and sharing, here's a frustration, or here's something that was a total win today. Because we didn't have competition across the classrooms, we were always talking about, I just don't know how to do this. Oh, hey, this worked in my class. You want to try it? And the ability to share like that.
We shared like crazy that first year. Yeah.
That's not common in a lot of schools. And I really felt like not just the camaraderie and the things that we built intentionally to socialize, we socialize with each other outside of school, but it just made it made the whole environment feel very welcoming.
I was trying to remember. Do you remember? So I was obsessed at the time, as you may remember, with The Office. And so we took on the idea of the Dundie Awards, and we made the Stassi Awards. And so at our Christmas party, we gathered everyone. I rolled out a red carpet in our house, and Matthew and I had gotten everybody a trophy.
I have mine here somewhere.
A trophy, and we called it the Stassi Awards. And so we would call everybody up, but it was for absurd. Do you remember what your first one was?
In Wannabe or something like that, I think.
Oh, that checks out. That totally checks out.
Conference in Canada that spring. I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
That's so funny. So we gave absurd, silly awards. They meant nothing. But it was just those moments of like, we were very intentional about being silly, and we laughed so much that first year. One of our coworkers did not know, we made a Ryan Reynolds reference, and she didn't know Ryan Reynolds. So we sent a photo through the email of Ryan Reynolds, and her response was something about a muscular wildcat. And Ryan Reynolds has stayed a staple at Anastasis all the years in different ways. The kids have like a flat Stanley of him the last couple years in the junior high. So Ryan stayed with us all those years, but just we had so many good like inside jokes from that year, and we were all doing the hard things together. So even on the hard days, it was like, it was hard, but we're all literally in the same room now crying together, because the proximity was literally so close that there was no separation of like, closing your classroom door and doing it solo, or, going into the office. There was no office. So it was just like we were all living pretty authentically in real time, building the thing together, and then experiencing everything that comes with building the thing together.
I think that is huge, that a huge piece of it, that we were building it together. It didn't ever feel like, admin, you and Matthew were telling us, you have to do this. And you really...
We couldn't have told you if we wanted to, Michelle.
But you trusted us. And that, I know I've said that in the previous episode, but that, you're appreciated. You know that there's a level of trust. You want to do the work because you want to do well for the kids, but you also want to do well because you're part of the staff that just really appreciates each other for the gifts that you bring. And it wasn't, Michelle, you're better at math, so you should go tell them what to do. And it wasn't like that. You had inquiry experience. You should tell everybody else what to do. It was truly a collaborative feeling. And because of that, like, we all got to be ourselves. We didn't have to look like, we didn't have to all teach the same way. We didn't have to go into some Anastasis teacher academy.
We had no idea what it was supposed to look like. And so we were all just deciding what it looked like.
And you felt better, like, oh, that really didn't work. And I didn't feel like an observation coming in and I failed on the day they observed. There didn't feel like there was going to be this huge grade for me, again, we're not grading our
Mhm.
students, we're not grading our teachers. We got feedback. It
Yeah.
was timely and meaningful, just like the kids.
And it wasn't just from us.
Right.
Again,
Right.
you were getting it from parents, you were getting it from students, you were getting it from peers. Like it was all of us.
Absolutely. And that environment really fostered such collegiality that I know that a lot of other teachers get that.
Mhm. I have not ever experienced that level anywhere else.
Yeah.
And that first year, as hard as it was to be in those teeny tiny I mean, they were big spaces, but like we were in close quarters and everybody together. As hard as that was in moments, I think it couldn't have been any other way to build what we were building. It was so important that we were like almost on top of each other in some ways.
Right.
Because at any moment, I'm hearing what the kids are saying, and in real time, I'm like, I can help with that. Like it was where in the building we moved to, the office was in such a different part of the building than where the kids were learning, that you didn't always get those accidental happy moments of growth together.
Yeah. And everything was mobile, as you said before, that
everything was mobile. There was across the hallway from the classrooms, there was a large unfinished storage space. And so being in this church, they didn't want it to look like there was a school that ever existed there. So we literally had to disappear twice a week and roll everything across the hallway. And there were, again, lovely pieces of being that agile, because we had to be really specific about what's important to the learning. And there was no redundancy. If it wasn't in support of learning, it wasn't worth moving.
Right. So there are some pluses and minuses for that. One of the biggest disadvantages, I think, is that we didn't get to always post student work. So
I hated that more than anything. We kept trying to solve it, and it was so hard to solve that issue in that space.
I love walking into a school and seeing the evidence that there are children there. And when you see that there are pictures of kids and there's, artwork or any kind of projects that they've done, and that's out for people to see that. And I think that's super important in any school, because it should be about the kids. When you walk in and you see paintings on the wall that adults have done.
And the space we would move to, that made me so you walked into any space and it was like, oh, clearly this is student owned.
Right.
Yeah.
So important.
That was one of the biggest downfalls of that space was not being able to really put things up and even like the learning process and all had to kind of disappear constantly. So, well, we talked a lot, and there's still things we didn't talk about, but I think we're going to have to save them because we're coming up on 2 hours.
Yeah, we should probably call it.
There's always time for more stories, right? We should call it for today. Next time we should talk about Crave and Spark, how those came about, because we didn't talk about that today, and that I think was brilliant. A brilliant accident the first year. We didn't talk about like Storyline or Identity Day, and I think we should talk about those.
Definitely.
So for next time, some more stories. But I think that was good. It was fun to go back and walk down memory lane, but also to realize how far we came. I should have done that more along the way to realize like how much we had done.
But we did well. We definitely talked about the things that we're like, okay, this didn't work. We know that, but we did so much, whether it was intentional or intuitive or some mixture of the two. There was so much of really good things that happened in that year that I think it's important to make sure we know and have noticed those things and say, we did that right.
We did that right. We did a lot right that year. And we had fun. That crew was so fun. The kids, the adults, like everything about it was, that was a really fun year. And when you're starting something, just a heads up for anybody who thinks they're going to start a school. If you're starting a school, top tip, you have more grace the first year than any other year. So like live it up that first year. Nobody is expecting it to be perfect. So just let it be imperfect. It gets harder every year because then the expectations rise, right? Or you've like developed habits that may or may not be in service of everything and everyone all the time. So live it up the first year when you're doing the new thing. All right. Onward. All right. That felt good. I said stop. We're going to find out. It says stopping. On my end, it says stopping. Can you, I know, just, yeah, tell me about the song you made. We'll make it our outro for today. I know, but it's not letting, the stop button just says stopping. It doesn't give me an option for anything else. Oh no, you're going to leave me here by myself? It's horrifying. It still shows me as record, like it still also says recording, but on the stop button, it only says stopping. Maybe because it's so long. Hey, Michelle, where else can people find you online?
I blog at avenue4learning.com, and the 4 is the actual number 4, not the word 4, avenue4learning.com.
And you can find me at dreamsofeducation.wordpress.com, which is my original blog. You can also find me at ktsplace.com, which is where I share a bunch of resources and kind of projects that we're currently working on. And we are both on Blue Sky at the moment, but not as active as we once were on our favorite bird. Come find us and connect with us in other places, and we look forward to connecting with you.